I'm going to call to order the regular Fort Ord Reuse Authority Board of Directors meeting for Friday, September 13th. Let's see. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Supervisor Phillips, since you're standing up, would you lead us in the pledge? Thank you. That was efficiency in action. And our next item of business is closed session, and council will let us know what we're going to be discussing.
Yes, thank you, Chair, members of the board and public. Item 3A on the closed session agenda, conference with legal counsel, Government Code Section 54956.9A D1. The case is Marina Community Partners versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority. That's a matter of pending litigation. Secondly, 3B, conference with legal counsel, one item of potential litigation, Government Code Section 54956.9D. There's one case to discuss.
Thank you. Are there any public comments on any of the items for closed session? Seeing none, we'll close public comment. We'll recess to closed session and return as soon as we can. All right, we're going to reconvene the Fort Ord Reuse Authority meeting. Oh, right. And council, would you report any action taken in closed session?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members of the board and public, the board met in closed session on the first item, which is the Marina Community Partners versus Fort Ord Reuse Authority case. The board was presented with the final settlement agreement, which they approved during the course of the closed session. And the terms of that final settlement agreement are the following. FORA has agreed to pay MCP, Marina Community Partners, the sum of $4,666,399 for a total settlement. The initial payment of $3 million goes into an interest-bearing escrow account to be dispersed initially by a $1.5 million payment once the building removal contractor gives his notice to proceed, and then the remaining $1.5 million will be dispersed when FORA receives notice of completion of the project. The remainder of the $1.6 million will be credited to Marina Community Partners against FORA's share of land sales proceeds for Phase 2 of the Dunes project as the land is taken down in Marina. There is nothing within the terms of the settlement agreement that shall be interpreted to increase FORA's overall obligation for deconstruction costs beyond the $46 million that is set forth in the MOA or the Memorandum of Agreement or the reimbursement agreement. That is the reporting out of that settlement that was just approved in closed session finally. And 3B, conference with legal counsel. This is one item of potential litigation. The board heard from counsel on that item, and there's nothing to report out.
Thank you. If a member of the public wanted a copy of the settlement agreement, how would they access that?
We can do it a variety of different ways. They could make a Public Records Act request for it, or we can make it available otherwise through the staff.
Madam Chair, if I may, let the record show that the representatives from the City of Marina were not involved in the settlement discussion and subsequent vote that took place. Thank you.
And the reason for that is that Marina was a party to the litigation and had no standing to be within the closed session. The settlement agreement had just recently become final, and the board needed to approve that, and Marina had no standing to be within the closed session.
Thank you. And if members of the public want a copy of the settlement agreement, it will be posted on the FORA, the Fort Ord Reuse Authority website. Thank you. Next, we'll move to acknowledgments, announcements, and correspondence.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good news, bad news. Good news. Mary Israel, who's been a member of the FORA staff for the last several years, is now a member of the staff of the Local Agency Formation Commission. That now makes 3 former Fort Ord Reuse Authority staff members that comprise the LAFCO staff. Supervisor Phillips is smiling over there for a reason. Second, I'm sorry, I want to get this correct. I made the wrong statement. Sean Hall is actually the person that's gone to LAFCO. But Mary Israel is now a member of the planning staff in the County Resource Management Agency. That's another reason why Supervisor Phillips and Supervisor Parker and Supervisor Adams are smiling today. The board had some conversations, and we mentioned this last month. Helen Rodriguez is not available to be here today, but that doesn't mean that she has not agreed, as we discussed, to return full-time to the Fort Ord Reuse Authority staff. And so she is back as Controller Finance Director for FORA. And I see everybody smiling about that, too. We had a couple of quick items. Our colleagues, I think, from University of California, I don't see them here, but they did announce last week that their developer for the project out of the UCMBest property that made a bid under the auction from last year has backed out of that project. The Rutherford Group is no longer involved, and that puts the question at how we will move forward with that particular project. Next, an important item, our colleague Christy Reimer is here, and one of them wants to make a specific request for board members for their interest. We are hosting the Association of Defense Communities Conference on September 30th to October 2nd, and in her other capacity, not as consultant to FORA, but in her capacity as ADC staff, Christy has a request.
Well, I just wanted everybody, as Michael said, to put this on their calendar. We have some very interesting sessions, but as importantly, we have an opening session what we'd like to invite all the elected officials to, starting at 4 o'clock down at the conference center, and then it will roll into a reception. Right before that, from 2:30 to 3:30, if you're interested, we actually have a financial roundtable session that is a fairly unique one, because not only do we have an overview of what kind of financial tools are out there, new market tax credits, opportunity zone type of funds, but we also have invited investment community to come. And they are pretty high-powered. We have Jeremy Towers from the Arcturus Impact Fund and also Brevet Capital. So that's a session on Monday at the conference center, and then we will on Tuesday start things again at the conference center, and then roll out here for lunch at the golf course, and then sessions here in the afternoon. So hopefully all of you can participate. Thank you.
Next item on this list of announcements, Josh Metz is going to make a note about the October 14th at CSUMB Opportunity Zone Conference.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I just wanted to let everybody know that the Central Coast marketing team, of which many of the staffs of the cities here are members, as well as Santa Cruz and the county, we're hosting a Monterey Bay Opportunity Zone Investment Forum, which will be held on Columbus Day, Monday, October 14th at CSUMB City Center. And we're seeing a lot of interest already from the private sector and developers and affordable housing developers. So you can find, the website is mboz.org, and you can find out about that and ask me if you have any questions. Thank you.
For those of you that don't know, we are right in the middle of maybe the largest by acreage opportunity zone along the California coast. And then finally, there's a piece of correspondence Nicole Hollingsworth has brought to our attention.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to read a statement on behalf of Senator Monning regarding Senate Bill 189, so if you'll please. As most of you know, on August 30th, the Assembly Appropriations Committee decided to hold SB 189 in committee and not pass the bill to the Assembly floor. Because of the action of the Assembly Appropriations Committee, and because today, Friday, is the last day to move legislation in 2019, SB 189 cannot advance to the governor for his consideration. I am extremely disappointed in the Assembly action, as SB 189 had bipartisan support in the Senate and in the Assembly Local Government Committee, and I'm unsure of what exactly occurred in the Assembly to cause SB 189 to be held in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. The lack of clarity around the action that was taken in the Assembly is troubling. Many have asked if there's a legislative remedy to reverse the action of the Assembly Appropriations Committee. At this juncture, the answer is no. I, along with my staff, held countless meetings with stakeholders and worked tirelessly to find a compromise to assist FORA with a smooth transition process. Throughout the process, I made it a point to ensure all voices were heard. We worked incredibly hard to ensure that there was transparency throughout our negotiations, and I took a number of amendments that were proposed in these meetings. As with most things pertaining to Fort Ord, not everyone agreed with every decision that was made, but I felt and still feel strongly that a regional approach is vital to a successful transition and sunset of FORA. Fort Ord is roughly the size of San Francisco and encompasses city, county, state, and federal properties. The former Fort Ord property represents a massive resource to this community. Throughout the process of working on SB 189, I have said numerous times that those who feel FORA simply needs to go away or to be extended outright for 10 years do not understand the complex issues that surround the former Fort Ord communities. It is these complexities that we attempted to address in SB 189 and why it was an appropriate compromise for the region. My commitment to seeing a successful transition of FORA has been unwavering. There are many outstanding questions surrounding the future regional development for the communities without a habitat conservation plan, uncertainty around successor agency agreements without funding mechanisms in place, and how the region will bond for blight removal. In the next 10 months, it is my sincere hope that local stakeholders will work together and pool their resources to address these needs before FORA sunsets. With many of the FORA staff having left or planning to leave soon, there remain many challenges ahead, and I wish everyone involved all the best as they work to address these very difficult issues. It would be disappointing to see the region suffer due to the lack of cooperation by a few jurisdictions. I want to thank the cities of Monterey, Delray Oaks, Pacific Grove, and Carmel, Monterey County, California State University, Monterey Bay, and the veterans community for their collaboration and support throughout this legislative process. I also want to thank Congressmember Jimmy Panetta and Assemblymember Robert Rivas for their active support of SB 189. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move now to roll call. Madam Clerk.
Supervisor Parker,
Here.
Supervisor Phillips, Supervisor Adams, Councilmember Gagliotti, Councilmember O'Connell, Mayor Pro Tem Morton, Councilmember Hoffa,
Here.
Mayor Oglesby, Councilmember Wizard, Mayor Carbone, Mayor Gunter, Councilmember Garfield, Councilmember Reimers,
Here.
Kathleen Lee, Nicole Hollingsworth, Erica Parker, Debbie Hale, Dr. Diffenbaugh, Steve Matarazzo, Dr. Ochoa, Andre Lewis, Larry Samuels, Colonel Ford, Bill Collins, David Martin, Lisa Reinheimer, Matt Zefferman.
Keith Vandermotten from Runicos.
You have a form.
Thank you. All right, we will move now to the consent agenda. Are there any board members who would like to pull any items for question or comment? Yes, Director Adams. 7A and B. Okay, thank you. Any other board members? Any members of the public wishing to pull any items for question or comment? Seeing none. All right, let's see what you've got for us on 7A and B.
So on 7A, the note on page 4, that I can put forward a friendly amendment on item B, saying that requesting friendly amendment to the motion to strengthen the language to. Can you please turn on your microphone? I was strengthening the language to guarantee replenishment of funds to ensure the Monterey County Regional Fire District did not had no loss in revenue, and that had been approved. Yet in 7B, when we are looking at the referral to the minutes there on page 8, that friendly amendment is not reflected. And I think for the record, I just want to ensure that that amendment remains in place, and
Yes.
that is in fact what we do.
Yes.
Okay? Thank you.
All right, so with that clarification noted, and will then the clerk make mention of that action in those minutes and bring them back, or how are we going to handle that?
If the board approves, we can just say that the affirmation was approved at this meeting. But absolutely, that's the case.
May I ask a question, procedure? So in the second vote, that was an amendment with regard to the building removal bond financing. I think that got characterized slightly different. And the second, it was still there, that it would be negotiated through, but it wasn't making sure that they were going to have no harm. There was a big discussion about that. And so I supported the motion the second time because it was revised. So I'm not disputing what happened at the prior meeting. I'm talking about the second vote on the motion, that there were several clarifications made, that it was for building removal, and that we would be looking at the issue raised with the regional fire, but not that we were guaranteeing they were going to be made whole.
So it sounds like before we say that so in the minutes of August 15th, the characterization that you're talking about, Director Morton, is what is in the minutes. So before we change that, essentially, by any action today, it probably would be good to go back and have the clerk, watch the meeting and really make sure. That was my recollection as well, but in the heat of the moment, it's...
We went through and looked at this, and the actual language that should be here is resolve. Instead of work with, the decision was that it should, and resolve Monterey County. This question right here, work with Monterey County on revenue loss issues. The actual final motion, I think, the request was that it say, and resolve Monterey County Regional Fire District revenue loss issues. But we should go back and bring that back to the board to review.
Yes.
So just for clarification, the distinction between Director Adams' motion is making them whole, and the second time in that discussion of resolving that was that resolution may be that there's no funds given. It's the full spectrum.
This is not what I'm recalling.
Right. So we'll have staff go back and parse every word.
Yes.
So for the moment, so we can approve the August 9th minutes, but we're going to have the August 15th minutes come back to us at the next meeting with clarification. Okay. In that case, then, I would consider a motion to approve items 7A, C, D, E, and F, with B coming back at our next meeting after. Yes, Dr. Ochoa?
For the purposes of making a comment on item 7D, I would ask that it be pulled from the consent agenda.
All right. Then in that case, since I think we have a sense for what we're doing on 7A and B, let's move to 7D.
Okay. Obviously, we need to receive a report, but I thought it would be worth pointing out for the information of the board that in item 6A of the agenda of the Veteran Issues Advisory Committee, the last sentence of the first paragraph states that a Fresno developer will be working with VTC to submit a request for qualifications for VTC to partner with another development agency to turn the former Seaside Clinic into housing for veterans. The Seaside Clinic in question is actually the old VA site that is fully enclosed by CSUMB campus. Just wanted you all to know that. And that we have some concerns about that. We'll be working on that.
Thank you. So with that, I would entertain a motion to approve 7A, C, D, E, and F, with 7B coming back at our next meeting.
So moved?
Thank you. There's a motion. Is there a second? Motion by Adams, second by Oglesby. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We'll move now to business items. I will just note that business items A in particular, and B are very much just for information. I don't think there's there may be some direction, but there's no particular action that's being requested. At the executive committee, we discussed whether to have a meeting this month because the discussion and the timeline for the bond issuance had shifted slightly, and we felt that it was important that the board and the public be kept up to date on what the progress is and what decisions the board will be being asked to make when. So with that, I'll turn it over to whomever. Mr. Said,
Yeah.
okay, we'll start with Mr. Hulmar.
Right, and Peter Said will provide a PowerPoint presentation with regard to this particular item, and we may also have Josh Metz add a few comments as we go through this process or answer any questions. Just, it's important to note that there's a lot of background here. This particular slide starts with October 2018, where we initially started in this process of looking at the potential of using the revenue accruing to FORA from tax increment to benefit everybody in the region by removing the remaining buildings on the former Fort Ord. While most of you already know that 77% of the buildings have either been removed or directly addressed by reuse from the former Fort Ord, there's still that 23% or 21% that's still left. The building removal activity started all the way back in 1994 and 1995 with some planning work that the very first staff members at FORA undertook with a contract from and grant monies from the Packard Foundation to look at how some of these resources on the former Fort Ord could be reused. And if those resources couldn't be reused, could they be dismantled in a way that the resources inside the buildings, the timbers and the other resources, could be reused? And so that goes all the way back to the very beginnings of this organization where that started. There's been a pilot deconstruction program. There's been asbestos removal programs. California State University, Monterey Bay has received 2 or 3 federal grants looking at ways of planing off the lead and the asbestos from the timbers so they can be reused. We've received actually 3 additional grants from the Packard Foundation for building removal. Stan Cook has probably become the nation's preeminent expert with what happens with World War II wood buildings, and has traveled to other places around the country like Aberdeen Proving Ground and other places in the Midwest, providing his expert counsel on how to handle these items. The history here involves the Monterey Regional Waste Management District. It includes the struggles that we've had about transporting contaminated waste from these buildings to Nevada and to Kettleman City, where there's a Class 1 fill that's required to make this happen. This is a mountain we've all climbed together for well over 20 years. It's a quarter century of work that we now have an opportunity to be able to bond against future revenues and finish the effort. Peter Said can talk to you about what we're doing today, but as many of you know, the circumstances now, the climate in the financial community is such that we have a special kind of a bond climate in the financial community. It's called, it's essentially an inverted bond market where in some ways, in some countries, they're paying folks to do things for bonds, but in this particular case, our bond issuance process will get us at least $35 to $40 million to make this happen. And I think the folks that we've heard from are indicating very positive comments. If we can get this done by the end of the year, we will be able to take advantage of that in ways that we might not be able to take advantage of next year. If you read Shearson Lehman or if you read any of the documents out of the Wall Street Journal earlier this week, they suggest that this particular bond market might start shifting in January next year. So there are some real deadlines for making this happen. As a consequence, your administrative committee and other members of the community are actively engaged in figuring out how to make this work. We had a very productive staff executive level meeting with Monterey Regional Waste Management District leadership about what they can do to help us in this process. We have had a very positive response so far from our administrative committee in working out some of the details. Peter will give you what those details are, but the two main ones have to do with making sure we know who the successor to FORA is, understanding all the risk and responsibilities and obligations of what it means to do building removal, and how the funds will be spent if this bond issuance is successful. It's our hope at the staff level, the few of us that are left, that we can resolve those issues and get those moving so that we can take advantage of the market. Peter.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Chair. My job today is really to provide you the next level down of detail. There is that high-level look. Recently, going back to May 2019, there was the question of whether we bond, if that was a legal approach. That question was brought up again a few months ago via some of the bond councils. That question has been resolved, and the question is the money that FORA collects a statutory pass-through, or is it something else? And the Department of Finance has considered it a statutory pass-through since 2011. That question has been resolved, and everyone is comfortable and confident that that's the way money is flowing. Currently, the county performs what's called a fund intercept, and that is the property tax that comes through to the county. They intercept that funds, and then they direct it to the FORA group. That's what has been happening since 2011, and it's what Department of Finance has reviewed on a regular basis. They've also looked at the total amount of funds which is feasible, and like Mr. Hulemard said, up to $30 or $40 million, and we're currently working on the bond package. Now, what has been done to get the bond package prepared is that we got our contracts final, both with the municipal advisor and bond counsel, so that we have a strong advisory group being able to provide us the information that we need. Economic Planning Systems is brought on. They're currently performing a fiscal consultants report that's putting together essentially the credit package and how much is available for this action that we're considering. NHA has issued an RFP for bond underwriters and bond trustees, and they have gotten responses back. That response is being taken to the administrative committee on September 18th, and they are going to consider the approval of a bond underwriter. There are two that are currently recommended, and so we want the administrative committee to look at that in its analysis and then select the bond underwriter so that we can move forward with getting bond underwriting counsel. That counsel will help us better understand exactly how much of the bond proceeds we'll be able to bring in, looking at various bond underwriting strategies. This is a map of the current Fort Ord area that has the building removal involved. It doesn't include the Ammo Supply Point, which is out by East Garrison, but it does have the 12 areas here that are being considered as the list of projects that will go into building removal. It does not include these two areas. The one up here to the north, and let me see if I can get my laser button to work here. This one up here. This is the one that is back here behind us. It's called Cedeck Hill. And that currently is being, Marina Community Partners has plans to see that removed in the next year. We'll probably see action on that in the next 3 or 4 months. We're going to see the building of this come down, or the buildings here come down, but it is not part of the bond process, so it's not in consideration. The other thing that's not in consideration is a number of the homes, or a number of the buildings that are here. Shea, yeah, for those who are living in them, Shea Homes has that under contract currently. And so FORA has provided a contract with Marina Community Partners to take this down, and that is, until that contract is resolved, those buildings are the Dunes' responsibility to take down, and therefore not a part of the bond. Now, the bond issuance requires that we provide, or for the bond investors, one successor entity to FORA. This successor entity will take on the responsibility for waste generation on site. They will be the ones signing off for waste generation. There'll be the bond administrators working with the trustee to make sure the information that is required is adequately communicated, and they'll be responsible for any excess fund distribution. What we mean by excess fund distribution is if a project, let's say surplus 2, currently estimated at 18 million, if they're able to complete that project for 17 million, then there is an excess funds, and so it will go back to the successor entity and then they would distribute it out. And that consideration will be done by the administrative committee here at the next meeting on September 18th. The admin committee is also working on bond proceed distribution recommendations. Now, this is not required for a bond issue, but many have expressed a desire to have consensus on this prior to bond, and so the administrative committee is working on this. In the legal documents, they'll be adding a mechanism for how to amend the distribution allocations. That's really, if this happens, then you can do this sort of language. And there are 4 different distribution strategies that the administrative committee will be considering. The first is to distribute a percentage of the funds to the stakeholders based on the increment generated in their jurisdiction. The second is to to distribute a percentage to the stakeholders based on the percent of blight owned in the distribution. The third is to allocate dollars instead of a percentage to the stakeholders based on the estimated project costs. So while one jurisdiction may have less buildings than another, the cost of those buildings are a lot higher than the others, and so there is a question on should we look at project costs. And then the last one is to allocate dollars to stakeholders based on a priority list. That leads into the next item. The administrative committee is going to consider on the 18th a recommendation on building removal priorities. Again, not required for the issue bond, but many want consensus on this before we move forward. There are 4 criteria, and the reason we put method here is because the question is which criteria should be the most important criteria. The first is using monies for public use building removal first. The second is using economic development monies first. And the third is using monies to remove buildings in the CSUMB view shed first. And the last criteria methodology is to remove buildings with the highest building removal risk first. So those are the 4 general priorities that everyone has been discussing, but the question which one is going to take importance is something that the administrative
Mr. Sahi,
committee
could you
wants to
explain
resolve.
what is meant by highest building removal risk?
Yes.
What does that mean?
So a property may have, say, in the range of 50 buildings, but the understanding of how to take those buildings down is thorough. We are aware of what's in those buildings, and so the risk of there being construction overruns is low. However, there are other buildings, for instance, we'll talk about the wastewater plant out here on state property, where no one really knows or understands what's in there, how they were built, and so the risk of a cost overrun is high on that building. And so the goal here is to take out the buildings with the highest risk first, so that if there are any overruns, then the ones with the lowest risk can have their dollar allocations adjusted. Again, it's just a methodology that's under consideration. There are a number of methodologies, and so the administration committee, we're looking to them to help define which ones that they all will have consensus on. Then, after we've defined the other 3 options, there is the issue of implementation. Once the money comes into the hands of either the successor entity or entities, the question is, what are the risks that are involved? This risk analysis has been provided in your board packet. I don't want to go through every item as it can be rather involved. But essentially, the key risks have to do with waste generation. When waste is generated on the former Fort Ord and gets transferred to a facility at Kettleman or Vacaville or Nevada, the ownership of that waste stays with the waste generator. There's a construction liability. If there are claims that may come out of construction, who will be taking on that construction liability? There's pollution liability. Once the land is cleaned, who will be responsible for that land 50 years into the future? There's multi-agency coordination risks and issues, as some of these projects need to have multiple agencies involved. And there's cross-boundary coordination. For example, if you go with a single entity solution for implementation, like, say, Marina taking on the responsibility for the funds, is Marina able to take down buildings in the jurisdiction of Seaside? So you've got some of these cross-boundary issues that need to be resolved. And then there's the ability to maximize building removal. If each area is doing its own thing, can you maximize building removal as far as cost goes, and there's questions like that. We did this analysis, and the analysis shows that we believe a JPA is probably the best solution. That's what the analysis shows. But the administrative committee is going to look at that and take a deeper dive into some of the concerns outside of what's in this list and look at what implementation methods would be best recommended. So in summation, the administrative committee is going to consider five things really, at the upcoming meeting, and that is the bond indenture successor entity who's in charge of the bond administration, the bond proceed distribution, the building removal priority, and the method of building removal implementation. Lastly, we are currently working with the regional fire district to come up with a solution. I know there's discussion over that language, but we are getting very close to a solution, and we have a very amenable options that are on the table, and we'll be discussing those with the administrative committee as well. So I will leave you with some questions.
Are there questions from board members? Dr. Ochoa?
Could we go back to the risk matrix? Yeah, are the cells with an X on them, are those the ones with the least or the most risk?
Well, let's take this one here. Construction inside another jurisdiction, multiple entities. If you hand that out to, say, Marina, they cannot do construction inside of another jurisdiction. They cannot do it if it's a single entity, but a JPA could do it.
Okay, so it's rather than an X, it's more like a check.
Yes.
Yes.
For what the best solution is.
Yes. My Word document didn't have checks, so
Okay.
I only had X's.
Okay, just to be clear on that.
Thank you. Director Wizard?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Said. Do I recall earlier in your presentation there was a slide that said that the bond issuers, or not issuers, the people with the money want us to have named a single successor?
The investors who will be buying the bond want clarity on who will be responsible for that bond beyond the life of FORA. So right now, FORA is responsible for that bond. They want to know if there's an issue with the trustee or the bank, who to go to resolve it. And so they want one person in the chain of command. They don't want multiple people confusing the project.
That makes all the sense in the world. If you could go back to your risk matrix, it appears as though that is a fatal error for us in considering a JPA if we cannot stand up a JPA in time to benefit from the window Mr. Hulamar talked about earlier with the bond market.
I can't speak to whether it's a fatal error or not. I do know it's something that the administrative committee needs to discuss.
There are a couple of options, Director Wizard. One would be that you identify a default successor in the event that a JPA is not created, but that ultimately you want a JPA to do it. So you wouldn't have to do it by the time you issued the bonds. I think the real issue here is, do you understand how all the money is going to be spent? If you understand that, that's what I hear is the biggest issue. Finding a successor to whoever's appointed is, it could be the county, it could be Seaside. I know you want to do it, but an entity, even though they can't do jurisdiction to jurisdiction, could work. as the bond administrator. That's the successor part. You might have to have some finesse as to what the JPA does to take on these other risk management issues, but you have a limited time to get that done because FORA goes away, and so the person that could manage all that would be gone.
Through the chair. Well, I'm not sure it would be the preferable approach. Do I understand correctly that the government code or the health and safety code already spells out a successor to FORA, short of any kind of implementation agreement? And so as a stopgap, LAFCO's name could appear there until a JPA is formed?
This does come under the category of different folks see the same language different ways. Our colleagues at LAFCO don't read it that way.
Thank you.
Any other, yes, Director Phillips, and then Director Morton.
I don't have a question, but I got to say I have beginning to have concerns about this bonding. I didn't when we thought Senator Monning's bill was going to pass, and that would give us 2.5 to 3 years to get all this settled out. But we just spent 15 minutes in closed session dealing with litigation around blight removal. And I have a serious concern when we're now closing things down and we have no responsible agency that we all can have confidence in that's going to be monitoring this. And there's going to be litigation. We see change orders. Anytime you have construction or demolition, you have change orders, and they come in, and we're dealing with that issue. And so with us getting out of the business so with limited time, and I have concerns about the county getting sucked into a JPA on anything. I want to see us get things assigned to one entity or another to monitor, but the JPAs, they're subject to litigation too. But I have concerns on this. I voted for it. Marina, even when Marina didn't, I voted for it, but I have serious concerns when we don't have an entity, and if I were these bonding people, I would have serious concerns about how we do this.
Thank you. Director Morton?
Yes, Peter. So the successor entity takes over the contractual relationship with the bond issue trustee. But there was a level underneath that, the project area successor agencies. And Mark, can't think of his last name, sorry. Northcross was trying to explain that the project area is where the work's going to be done and how much of the bond is going to be assigned to each project area, and that could be created by jurisdiction, that could be created by projects, that we write the rules for how that happens. So if in fact Seaside's responsible for its project area as a successor agency, Marina for its, and to Director Phillips' assertions about the county wanting to be in charge of its area, and then you just would need a successor entity that then takes the information from those project areas to make sure that once they vet the bills for the payment of the funds. So it seems like, at least in the staff report as I read it, that we kind of left out some of the, I'm going to call it middle management, but the ability to take middle management and put it where responsibility should lie. To your grid, where the city of Marina can't contract and say what's going to happen in Seaside and vice versa, that with us structuring it in a slightly different manner, we might be able to go there. So I would like going forward that we kind of explore that. But I did have some questions on the staff report. So one of the things that FORA is indicating is that they have maintained a pollution legal liability insurance policy for its protection with regard to the reporting and removal of toxic materials. Is this the same policy, public pollution legal liability policy, that many of us as jurisdictions previously purchased? And so the coverage under the policy that was purchased collectively is through what year?
2024?
That's what I thought. Okay.
I've-
So
Yeah.
if in fact there is a successor entity or we're a successor agency, that insurance policy would be covering what is talked about on page 27, the risks that are identified by FORA on page 27 of our staff report?
It would cover some of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, the next question is there a policy available that can be purchased?
So
And-
what we've done in the past is we've required, so we do have coverage that the language is rather clear about what exactly is covered. Part of it is for munitions and explosives, part of it is for other items. When you're actually undertaking the construction and moving things from one place to another, that's a different kind of coverage, and
That's
so
what
we had a different kind of coverage. There's also a different kind of coverage when the construction's underway and we get the contractors to name us as also insured for that time period. And then depending on how the material is moved, whether it's longer distances and how we, in a couple of cases in the past, we've had 4 different kinds of insurance coverage when we've done this kind of building removal work. So I'd have to look at all of the policies to fully understand how we cover everything. But yes, we have different coverage to make that all work now.
So what I'm suggesting is we ascertain what policies the successor entity and/or the project agencies would need. If it's available, if it's not covered within the scope of what we previously purchased, what do we need to purchase? And it's just a question that I think every entity that's going to be involved is going to have their legal counsel is going to be asking the same question. The other question that I had, or a distinction, in the minutes that then got continued, one of the things to Peter's position, a statement where he is saying that we have been clearly vetted for the bonds going forward. At page 7 of our staff report, bond counsel indicated it would be able to issue a clean legal opinion on this topic. And I want to know if we got that clean legal opinion, and if not, when will we receive it? That was at the board meeting of September 13th that it was said it would be forthcoming.
I believe you're responding to this issue about the statutory pass-through.
No, the bond counsel indicated it would give us a clean legal opinion. And I'm just trying to make sure we have it, that all of us are relying on it. And so I just want to be sure that it's in our files.
Thank you.
So those are questions that I would be interested in the next go-round, or admin trying to figure out what insurance is required.
Thank you. Mr. Hoffa and then Director Adams.
So going back to kind of the allocation, if the methodology was based on some sort of priorities, conceptual priorities, would that empower the successor entity to basically choose which buildings would be removed and which wouldn't, or in what order? Based on their interpretation of the priorities?
I don't have a clean yes or no answer. It's a bunch of if statements. If one is selected, then maybe. If a different one is selected, then maybe. So I can run through scenarios. I think it would be best if I ran through those scenarios with the admin committee first, and then we bring back their synthesized information to this board.
Okay. But so in terms of the power of the successor entity, basically they would have the power to distribute the funds for building removal based on whatever kind of standards or processes are set up.
So if that is put into the legal documents, then yes, someone could have that power.
As far as their liabilities, so there's a lot of risk and liabilities there, but I guess I'm trying to understand under sort of what scenarios would the successor entity then be liable for costs related to sort of to those things?
Yes.
They'd presumably be able to use the money that was generated by the bond, but I guess if it exceeded the bond, then they would be sort of liable, is that correct?
This was something where initially Mark Northcross was combining successor entity and entity responsible to implement into the same kind of discussion. Since then, we've made an effort to separate the two. There is the successor entity, and then there is the entity who implements. The entity implements will, for instance, hire a contractor. Whoever hires the contractor will take on the legal risks associated with managing a contractor. They may take on the legal risk of the insurances, depending on what decisions are moved forward. So we made an effort to separate the difference between the successor agency and those who will implement. It's not necessary for the successor agency to implement, although they can. Again, this is one of those, there's a lot of options on the table, and we want to bring that down into a nice synthesized recommendation for the board.
And I'm sorry, I have two more questions. So I understand that FORA is able to issue this bond and then have a successor entity kind of manage it. Can the individual jurisdictions that have blight sort of issue their own bonds under similar parameters, or is this something really that the region has to work collectively on?
No. Well, right now, FORA's 35% tax-through has been awarded to FORA through the Health and Safety Code, and we are able to bond that tax, that 35% increment, and we're able to encumber it beyond the sunset. That's been allowed by the code. Once FORA closes, that 35% will go to the standard waterfall distribution, right? So Monterey may get, I'm not an expert on the numbers, Monterey may get 6%. Monterey then has the choice to bond against whatever it wants to do with whatever revenues that it has. But I can tell you that the available tax increment that FORA currently gets is much higher than what any individual jurisdiction will get.
And the last question is, either sort of method of going forward, what if one or more land use jurisdictions chose not to participate? Or is this sort of dependent on all of the jurisdictions participating?
The bond issue is, the increment is generated from primarily 3 or 4 jurisdictions. It's Seaside, Marina, County, and Delray Oaks. And so if, for instance, Monterey City chose not to be a part, they're not providing anything to the tax increment or not into the revenue generation, and therefore they would not receive any funds and not be a party to the bond.
And what about one of the other cities? What if Marina, Seaside, County, Delray Oaks chose not to participate? Is this sort of dependent on all of them participating?
Right. There's in essence, yes, they could choose not to participate. You would not get the purchasing power. Basically, it's just going to change the calculation.
Director Adams and then Director Randers.
I think that some of my questions have certainly been touched on by Director Hoffa, but I wanted to just voice some concern. I'm very concerned about the timing on all of this, and I was wondering whether or not it is simply a matter of the return that we would get on the bond. Would it be possible, if we can't get our act together as FORA by June 30th, 2020, could the successor agency be the one that issues the bond?
No.
Could not?
No.
Could the
No.
JPA be the one who issues the bond?
No.
FORA has to issue the bond. This is revenue that accrues to FORA. It's FORA's authority. FORA could issue against all of its revenue that's coming forward. It'll be not all of it. It'll be a percentage. So even with the bond issuance, there will still be a residual that won't be used because only a part of it's there. It's a long story. Right, 60%. But no, I just want to make sure that everybody understands that when FORA does issue this, it has to be done before June 2020. There's a history here. We could have done this a few years ago, but when we looked into it initially, there were single-digit millions that we were going to wind up getting. It really almost wasn't worth the effort. And even when we looked a couple of years ago, we only thought we would get around 19 or 20 million. The bond market was so different, and the amount of revenue was so different, we were not getting as much in proceeds that could provide the benefit that this does. It's just kind of a perfect storm of economic conditions where, because of the great work in the cities of Seaside and Marina, the county work out at East Garrison and even the work in Delray Oaks has generated enough underlying revenue so that you can use that tax increment for the purpose of bonding. It was not available to us before, so this was not possible before. And the other part of the perfect storm is what's happened in the bond market in the last 5 to 6 months, to where this inverted bond market makes it possible. Those two significant economic conditions are not going to come around again, and FORA won't be here in 290 days.
So just another question, essentially. Under the status report, I noted that the administrative committee had received a presentation saying that two things have to happen before we can issue the bond. Number one, the consensus on successor agency, and number two, consensus on the allocation of the bond proceeds. And at the way that we have been going, I am concerned on whether or not we are going to be able to do this in a timely fashion. And I'm wondering if you or if the administrative committee or if the executive committee has taken the pulse of FORA, we as an entity, to see whether or not there is at least consensus on the fact that we could accomplish these things and issue the bonds by the date with which we need to do so.
There is 100% consensus that these bonds should be allocated to building removal. I think everyone's been very clear that these bonds should be allocated to building removal. I think the allocation itself is probably the simplest process of the bond. You note in the bond indenture that these funds are going to building removal, and then you provide a list of projects. That way everyone knows the bonds will be going to that. The only question is there's more projects than money. And so after the bond issuance, FORA has 6 months to determine how it wants to delegate those funds. And I say FORA, by the administrative committee has, I think, time to be able to decide that and then bring a recommendation to the board for an easy solution.
So 6 months for FORA to be able to make that determination. That 6 months starts kicking in, in 2 months from now, essentially 3 months, December.
Well, I say 6 months because of the closure in June 30, 2020. It is possible for the successor entity to make that decision following it as well. And all that's necessary, if that's a decision that the administrative committee wants, instructions need to be provided into the bond indenture to make that happen. So, I mean, at the most simplest level, they just need, the bond only needs to know who's going to be in charge once FORA is gone, and are you going to use this money on building removal, or do you want to apply it to something else?
And so going back to the prioritization that you had of building removal itself,
Of the individual projects?
Correct, yeah. So do you believe that we would need to have agreement for those, the priorities of the building removal distribution stages? Do you envision that we as a group would be able to come to agreement on those?
Oh, absolutely. I believe the administrative committee is already near consensus on this approach. It's just a matter of giving them the time to be able to bring that consensus back to the board, possibly October 7th. But I do believe the committee is close.
Okay, I really enjoy your optimism. Thank you.
I do believe that Peter has expressed it clearly and accurately. The members of the administrative committee recognize the opportunity and understand the importance of, maybe go back to the Rolling Stones. You get what you want, you're in trouble. You get what you need, we're in good shape. There's a probability that we can get. Yeah. Mick, when Mick Jagger sings, he's much more appropriate than I am, and he's a lot slender than I am. But Mick Jagger said you don't always get what you want, but you get what you need. And I think that in that particular case, we think that there's a great opportunity here to bring back to the board a little bit more fleshed out exactly what the bond issuance gives us, exactly how we might be able to use that in an efficient way to be able to address the needs for all of the jurisdictions with respect to building removal. It's way too good an opportunity to have our internecine warfare interfere.
Director Garfield.
Thank you, Chair. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Did you have
Director
somebody else
Ramers
lined
was
up?
first, and
Okay.
then you can follow her. Sorry.
Thank you, I appreciate it because the slide is up right now that I want to up. It was a concern to me when we heard the report, and it has to do with the legal documents have a mechanism for the SE to amend the distribution allocations. I would like, that troubles me, and I would like when you look at when the administrative committee and the executive committee look at this, that there will be some hard, fast decisions by this group if we are going to go forward with the bonds, so that after FORA sunsets, there won't be some battles in the courtroom in regard to who gets to be first, second, and third. So just a consideration.
Thank you. I'm going to underscore that because that was my same concern, is that I think that we need to find that, okay, there's a list of projects that are going to be done. There are other conditions, circumstances that might come into play where the project you thought was going to be third isn't ready or something else is going on. So there needs to be some flexibility about the order in which things are done. But people need to be assured that it will be evenly dealt with, so that okay, let's just say Pacific Grove becomes the successor entity. It's not going to be, but let's just say. Well, no, I am not offering. But I don't want to pick on anybody, so I'm picking on us, okay? So let's just say, and we decide that we're into it, and we've got projects 1 through 10 that have been vetted by the administrative committee, and project 3, we don't like those people so much. So we're not going to get to that one until something else happens or it's a leverage point. That's not fair. And there are many ways why we could find y'all, because we won't be the successor entity, could find yourselves in court to settle that. And to the extent as Director Reimer uses, let's please address the lanes to put this in so that we can minimize potential for messing stuff up. So thank you.
Yeah, I think what the administrative committee anticipates bringing back to this board, and we want to brief this on October the 7th if you're all amenable to that date, is to bring back a very hard and fast series of recommendations about how the funds would be distributed. We might bring 3 different ways of making that hard, fast recommendation. But, as Peter indicated, there's a likelihood that somewhere in the process there is going to be some funds that are left over or not used or excess is needed. So when we talk about the criteria or methods that we might want to use down the line for the successor entity to make a decision, it's about what do you do if you have those other revenue issues, and the specific set of criteria about how those are applied, I think the administrative committee is prepared to bring. So that's a 2-stage, a hard and fast, like you're saying, but understanding that there's going to be some residual that we come back later and do. And that would be the successor entity under specific criteria. My understanding from the bond associate, the consultants that we've been using, is that we have to define this in a rather specific way so that it's understood at the front end when the bonds are issued. Mm-hmm. The actual holders of the bond don't care what happens later on and how we spend it, but we do. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's important for the administrative committee to work on that 2-pronged approach.
Thank you. I think, great. Dr. Diffenbaugh, then Director Hoffa, and then Dr. Ochoa, please. And then maybe we can open it up to the public. And Director Hale, and then we'll open it up to the public.
Thank you very much. So I'm not a tax expert, but my understanding is that the property tax benefits the schools at a greater proportion than other entities. So if that property tax is being diverted away from the schools in order to pay for the bond, then my hope would be that the administrative committee would factor that into the decision-making of priorities in terms of projects that then would serve to benefit the school district. So that's projects like the Cypress Knolls that's surrounding Marina High School, or other projects in which housing would be developed and kids would move in and be generated in order to go to our schools. So that's just a request when the deliberation is happening.
Thank you. Director Hoffa?
So in terms of the allocation of the funds, could the bond sort of designate a certain percentage or a certain amount to each of the jurisdictions that have blight? That would perhaps mitigate some of the concerns about who's in charge of distributing. If each jurisdiction that is part of this and that has blight knows they're going to get a certain percentage based on some of those other criteria you talked about at the beginning. That's just a thought. Could it be done that way? So
Absolutely.
You know, Marina knows it's going to get X amount of that, and Seaside knows, and Coney knows.
Yes, a number of entities have proposed that as a solution.
Great. Let me see. We were jumping. Was it Dr. Ochoa next, and then Director Hale?
Thank you. I have a comment, but it's predicated on a question or two. Could you elaborate on what the CSUMB view shed concept is on the priority list?
Yes, the city of Seaside put this forward. It's a very interesting concept, and they said that all buildings that can be, they see CSUMB as the major driver for economy in the region, and so they believe that projects that are within the view shed or visible from CSUMB are the projects that have priority. This was a suggestion. Again, still working this out.
Okay. Well, I want to elaborate on that point. The term viewshed may be descriptive of the geographic distribution of the projects that would be covered by it, but it shouldn't be interpreted to imply that this doesn't have an economic development dimension to it. It's very much, it's the fact that these are the blight that is contiguous to the campus, where development would be, most productive in terms of providing services to the students and the staff and faculty in the campus. So I think that anybody who values economic development as a basis for prioritizing projects should realize that that other one also is an economic development rich priority.
Thank you. Director Hale? Oh, did you want to respond in any way, Mr. Saeed?
No, I think he stated a very good point.
Right. Good. Thank you.
The Transportation Agency has been a participant at the Administrative Committee, and I think that we are very close to reaching agreement. We're more of a side participant as compared to the underlying jurisdictions. But I feel like this is a really great opportunity for us, but really everybody who's got buildings that they were never sure how they were going to pay to remove them. And so while there's a lot of details that you all are rightfully looking through and making sure are fully addressed, I would hate to have us miss this opportunity. And so I think that if the Administrative Committee can get together and provide a proposal that compromise proposal, I hope that you would all consider it carefully, because it's an opportunity that we did not think that we were going to have. And so it would be, it's a tremendous timing, as Officer Hulamard has said, and so I would hope that we can figure out all these details, even if it is a short period of time.
Thank you. If there aren't any other burning questions from board members, I would like to open this up to the public. Are there any members of the public who would like to ask questions or make comments on what you're hearing so far?
Good afternoon. This is Lisa Berkeley, the City of Marina. And I just have a couple of comments and questions. First, I'd like to echo Mayor Pro Tem's earlier comments regarding City of Marina. And I also want to be clear that the way the staff report is written, it looks like Marina has completely agreed to this. And while Mayor Pro Tem has covered a lot of this already, I just want to be clear that this hasn't been approved by council yet, or council has not had complete buy-in. So just want to be clear on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else with public comments?
Ron Cheshire. Yeah, sort of, but I'm back. Okay, thank you. What do we know? We know two things. We know that blight has been a detriment to development, economic development, okay? We also know that blight has been used against economic development. It's been used as something that, gee whiz, we got to get rid of the blight first. Okay, we'll give them what they want. You are being presented with a tremendous opportunity. You're being asked to basically give direction. This is not a final decision. Okay? You're asked to go into a process. Now, one of the things that your bond people better look at and provide you some information with is what's going to happen as the bond, as the interest rates on, or the bond rates continue to escalate. For every point, what's going to happen to your buying power, so to speak? And then in regards to these priorities, I understand that you have priorities. But you know, if you had the money to take all the blight down, then that would probably get rid of some of that anxiety, because you don't have the money to take everything down as currently calculated. And that's why the Monterey-Santa Cruz Building Trades Council wrote its letter. Now, either, you know, you can ask the federal government for an outright grant, or you can go ahead and possibly get money from the federal government and pay it back as the parcels are sold. That becomes a little bit problematic because there may have been agreements in regards to purchase prices. There might be a number of factors that you have to take into consideration, but the whole thing is that I'm sure FORA has the numbers and can put it together for you. So again, you have an opportunity. You're not being asked to make the final decision. You're in a process, and I would most certainly hope that you would move forward in regards to this, so we can basically get economic development back on track out here at Fort Ord for the betterment of all of us. Okay? I mean, I wish I had an opportunity like this when I was a young man, you know? When I was 21 years old, if Raquel Welch would have walked up to me and said, "Hey, young man, I really like you. That's great. What's your name?" I wouldn't sit there and go, "Ba-day, ba-day, ba-day." You know? I wouldn't ask for a majority vote. I'd move on. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cheshire. Any other members of the public? All right, thank you. We'll bring it back to the board. Are there any other comments that people want to make? I do appreciate both the board and the staff bringing this forward, because as you can see from the questions that we have, it's complicated, it's important, and FORA is really doing everything they can to move this pretty quickly in the scheme of bond issuances. And so when the decisions come, it's going to be a lot, and it's going to be there's going to be pressure to make decisions quickly. So all of this discussion and what the staff has been able to pick up about where concerns and priorities are, it's really helpful. And as you've heard, the admin committee is really working on these issues, trying to bring something forward to us that really reflects something that will have sufficient clarity before we go out to the bonds, that we can feel confident that the process will roll out as smoothly as possible. I think one thing that would be helpful when we do come back, there is a special meeting proposed, as you probably saw in the staff report, on October 7th. That is a Monday, so that we can get a sense for where we are, and then decisions that need to be made on the 11th, which is our normally scheduled meeting. We will have a chance to process that information. I think when we do come on October 7th, it would be helpful for the bond folks to be able to tell us what the costs might be to us if we aren't quite ready by the end of 2019. If we have to go into January or February, how much do we lose by that? because I think this really being thorough and making sure that we're clear and we have agreement before we go into this is going to be critical. And if we need another month to avoid a lot of wrangling and heartburn down the road, I think we need to be prepared to do that. But we also want to know what the cost is. The other thing I wanted to say is that the Director Phillips and I, well, in his supervisor role, we had a meeting of the Fort Ord Committee of the county yesterday, and we heard from county staff who've been participating in the administrative committee. And these options that have been presented, I really felt the way that they are weighing these and balancing them and trying to work in as many options that make sense as possible. It's much more nuanced than I think came across here. So I feel really good about the quality of that conversation. For instance, the idea of really keeping track of public lands or public uses. One of the challenges is if you are going to be proposing your land for a public use, you don't necessarily see the economics working out. So you might not be able to anticipate that you would have the money later to bring down the buildings. And so this kind of bond money opportunity would be huge for those kinds of uses. And that, I have to say, I hadn't really thought about that, but they're putting that in the mix to see, you know, where that shakes out when they're setting the priorities. So I do, we're expecting a lot from our admin committee, and I'm hoping that as they have in the past, they can reach a degree of agreement that then can be presented to us in October. Any other comments? Yes, Director Oglesby?
I thank the chair. I just wanted to put some thoughts on the table. Director Hoffa hit the nail on the head when he said earlier about what at least for the city of Seaside, what we're looking at is just what is our part of the proceeds. We'll take that money and we'll decide which buildings we want to take down. Just let's be clear about it. I think staff did a good presentation, but that's what some of the things that were left out. And we should go forward with it. These buildings, this blight is not Seaside or Marinas or MST's blight. It's the regional blight. And so this is what this body is supposed to be doing. But within the jurisdictions, I think the jurisdictions know better which building determines their economic value. I understand what Dr. Diffenbach said about the school districts, but still, you know, as a regional body, that's our concern about bringing in the money so we can figure out how to take the buildings down within the realm of the jurisdiction. So, but I really raised my hand to say is I'm looking for something before December. I'm not looking to go into the new year and get too close to June. That's a little bit unacceptable. You know, we should be able to decide this thing so we can make the bond market by December, and that what is it Michael was Mr. Ulamar was talking about. If we time it right, if we get on there right now, we can create another $4 to $5, $6 million. Now, why would we wait and mess around and talk among ourselves for 90 days and leave $5 million in the bond market? Because we can't, not that we can't decide, but we're trying to determine too much. You know, we should let the jurisdictions decide which building they want to take down with their little share of the money. And so I just throw that on the table to ask you guys to think about that. We should really be trying to hit this thing before December. We got many more things to decide before June 30th. And so trying to put the bond within that discussion, we don't need to have that in the new year because those 6 months are going to go pretty quick. So I thank the chair.
Thank you. All right, Director Morton? Mm-hmm.
So we've now heard Seaside, and I think Marina, we haven't discussed it as a council, but to have the project areas, so there's money assigned to project areas, and the jurisdictions then, if it's a jurisdiction project area, you set your priorities. Seaside gets to decide what it's going to spend. If it costs more than that, what's second on their priority may not get done, or if it costs less, they can determine going in their project area to the second project but what was raised at the admin also is if you only had 2 million left, project 2 is going to cost you 4 million, but project 3 you can do completely, that in your project area, you can move your money southwards, but you can't move your money across project areas such as to give it to some other jurisdiction. So that was a significant amount of discussion, I thought, at the admin committee. And one of the reasons that looking at it as project areas, to Tamsi's point, if their piece of property is in the city of Marina, it may be very prudent for them to be within that project area. The MCWD water tank is within the county's jurisdiction and might be within that project area. So that is the question. And I think if we get to the point that each jurisdiction has a project area and is responsible as the project area successor agency, that's the level where you're contracting, you're making sure prevailing wages are paid, you're vetting what you're going to pay for when invoices come in, and then that recommendation after your project area agency approves it, it's going to the successor entity, and it relieves some of that burden and responsibility that we're all choking on over what should be the successor entity if it's a JPA, that there's not a lot of discretion there for disagreement as Director Phillips is worried about. But one thing that was really clear is that you write the rules, and if you write the rules, you're trying to remove discretion or exercise of discretion even once the bond is issued in December, which is all our goal, not just removing discretion after June 30th, 2020. So I'm going to ask that, I know, Peter, you had prepared some project grids, but they weren't sorted out by project areas. And it would be really beneficial, at least for the city of Marina, to start looking at what would be those projects. You've assigned values to them, but it's your red and blue grid, is that you had them separated by priorities. But if it was done by jurisdiction, the city boundaries, then at least it could come to City Council and my city, Seaside County Board of Supervisors, for all of us to look at that and start considering, because direction ultimately is going to come from the governing board of a jurisdiction, not from an admin representative. So the sooner that comes, I think we all would be better prepared on October 7th.
Thank you. All right, well, this has been a good discussion. Thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing what the admin committee and all of us can come up with in October. All right, we'll move now to 8B, Transition Plan and Implementing Agreements Progress Report.
Yes, Chair, Josh Metz will provide a brief PowerPoint presentation. This is a PowerPoint we collaborated with our colleagues from the Regional Government Services. We certainly did. They do happen to be in Fiji, and we didn't think he wanted the disembodied voice on the phone today, so Josh will take responsibility for PowerPoint.
Thanks, Michael. Board members, I am indeed not Kendall Flint, but she has been communicating with us from Fiji to get all this together. You've seen many of these before. This is the path to implementation of the 2018 transition plan, and all of this is in process. I think at this point we're in the final draft agreements to agencies phase, and in this packet there was a placeholder in the packet, but it was sent out electronically earlier in the week, the updated master transition plan implementing agreement. So hopefully you all received that and were able to access that information. This is a graphic they use to talk about the functions of FORA and how they're funded through FORA. And once FORA transitions, those would be, functions would be transitioned to these agencies up here. Notice the one you haven't seen a logo of before, the JPA would be the Habitat Conservation Cooperative. And so they're currently working on a set of agreements that were outlined in the board report in conjunction with each of these agencies. And this is the status of those agreements as of maybe even to this morning. So you can see that the implementing agreements, which the RGS consulting team have framed up into a single multi-party TPIA, is in process, and the draft is available for your review. And encouragement is provided to engage your legal staff and others to look at that closely. We've already received a number of constructive points of feedback from the county, from the Army, from multiple other entities. So there is a water agreement that's also in draft, and there are comments being provided on that, although there is some of the water stuff that's included in the master agreement as well, so that has come up from our colleagues at CSUMB, for example. And then the ESCA team at FORA has taken an active role in leading the drafting and gaining approvals with the regulatory agencies for the ESCA transition. Document stands here and can answer any details, as well as Bill Collins has been a big part of that. That's all moving forward, and I believe the city of Seaside has even taken some actions in that regard, but expect, it looks like here, the draft for board review in December is their proposed date. The latter two at the bottom of this chart, the EDC successor and the LRA successor, are all included in that master agreement, so look for that reference there. And then there are a series of agreements. They went through the entire set of agreements that we put on the website. I believe there's 140 or so documents that were put up there. They went through all of them and were able to reduce them down to this kind of refined list based on some of those documents on the website being earlier versions of an agreement that was then updated and amended. So these are all the agreements. These are the dates at which the team is bringing the draft to the FORA Legal Counsel, is this first column here. Let's see here. Yeah, this one here. So they're coming back from Fiji right at the end of September, and will be, I believe, even before that, communicating all of the latest drafts to us, and then looking to bring them to the board in November. If that's right, let me just go back and check revised drafts. Yeah, so that's what we have from RGS on the process, and be happy to take any other questions. These are, of course, the remaining agreements that are really being handled through with existing staff. So we have taken on continuing to manage the managing our HCP, EIR, EIS consulting team, and then working to advance the formation of the HCP Joint Powers Authority. And we've also been engaged with LAFCO. Just this week, we were over there coordinating with LAFCO staff to be sure that our timelines are coordinated, and we continue to work on these two CIP projects as well. So that's the presentation, and happy to take any questions that I might be able to answer. If
But
not,
none-
I'll
but none
call
that
on
you
my
can't?
team.
Yeah. Thank you. Any board members? Yes, Director Adams with questions.
Sure, I have some questions, but I can't gauge whether you can answer them or not.
Yeah.
So we'll start with just, what is your confidence level that the jurisdictions are going to sign like a multi-agency TPIA?
I really hope that they're able to do that, and I think with the imperative of the ending legislation with the failure of SB 189, that there's a more imperative to do so.
Okay, that's a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then secondly, when do you think the water TPIA can be complete and signed?
I might look over at my friend Keith Vandermountain from MCWD to respond to that one.
If I may, yes, thank you. We are working on updating the drafts. We had meetings throughout the last several months. I think we'll have updated drafts probably within the next month. I think the time frame we hope for is by the end of this year.
So do you think by the October FORA meeting?
It might be tight, but certainly I do think we're on track to get these done by the end of this calendar year, by December.
Okay, thank you. And then secondly and lastly, when do you think that the ESCA TPA can be complete and signed?
Yeah, so Stan, maybe you want to address that one?
Without a crystal ball, that'll be a little tough, but the plan that we've laid out right now is to have that done by the end of the year. You know,
Okay.
we've got three drafts. We're three versions of the draft final, and final anticipated to go through the regulatory agencies in the Army and the city of Seaside. That'll take, path we've laid out is to try and get it done by the end of the year.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I guess the point that I'm trying to make here really is that it seems like at least on two of the things that we have to complete, we're sort of almost there. And I'm just wondering if it is on our behalf as the board or staff or the cities involved with this, if we could just get a couple of things done so we can check the box and feel like we're moving forward, because time is really going fast, which is why I was kind of pressing for the November board meeting from Marina Costa, and again, just looking at Seaside for the ESCA language. I just really think, yeah, end of the year, if we could get a couple of things done just right out of the chute, I feel like all of us would feel a little bit more confident that we're really going to be ready by June 30th, 2020.
We agree.
Yes,
Agreed.
Director Oglesby, and then Director Garfield.
I guess I could just agree. But I did speak to one of our attorneys on the way down here, and they haven't had a chance to look at the draft, but that is a priority for the city to make sure that ESCA agreement is signed. Try to make sure we do it around the same time we do the bond, but, sometime in, December or before. But that is our priority to get that done.
Director Garfield, and then Director Wizard.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to dive down into the nitty-gritty little details. Is that you're saying that there'll be drafts available, say, in November, but won't many of the members that would be signing this need to go to their counsel, their lawyers, and then they come back with suggestions, and it gets really fluid when that happens. So what's the timing or the management process for getting things to council members for approval and then back here and having it a consistent process? Because just because we agree doesn't mean that's going to happen. And I think that actually would have been to you. Yeah. I wondered where you went. There you go.
I was paying attention as much as possible, but I got flagged in here for the first time to sit in when Michael had to walk out of the room. But I can tell you that we have the consultants that we're working with are pretty clear on the urgency and the need. And certainly things did change significantly about 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago when that legislation failed. So I know they will be here to answer directly, but had previously arranged their trip. But I can say that they're very clear on timelines. They have a schedule that appears on paper to get us to the finish. And so with the conditions, with the staff and the transitions that have been going on there, they're kind of our best hope. So we're working with the team to move the ball.
I truly appreciate that. There's just this one thing I'm not hearing is a scheduling process that recognizes that it's going to take 1 or 2 meetings of councils, which adds 2 months to, may add a month or more to it, even if people are agreeing and just making some minor changes. If it becomes substantive, then it has to go back to all the other ones all over again because it's been changed. So I would like somebody to, I'm sure they're thinking about it. I just haven't heard anybody talking about it.
Okay, so I can certainly call it noted and...
Thank you.
Well, I was just going to add, our consultants seem very well organized. The fact that they're not here is a little bit of a problem. But today you have the implementing agreement draft. First time I've seen the final, first time you have it. It's incumbent on each director to get it to their legal counsel now so that the process can start. So it's up to you to keep the ball moving and get it moving quickly.
Director Wizard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just have a clarifying question. I'm sure I'm overlooking a detail that others have already seen, but just for the sake of reference, on page 2 of this 8.5 by 17 or whatever it is, 14, there's a long list of things, and most of them have nothing in the far right column. So I'm wondering to whom those agreements are going to be addressed or sought to be implemented with. So, I mean, like, it's so, okay, October is when the FORA, County FORA Developer Endangered Species MOA is going to be reviewed as a draft to Mr. Giffen, but November is when Mr. Giffen is supposed to have his comments done, and then what? Is that, I mean, does it come back to the board for us to sign? But with whom are we executing that agreement? So I guess if there's a question, I guess it's to say that I would like to see what, where is this supposed to be routed to in that far right column for all of the various topics?
This is a chart that was developed by RGS. We now have it. I will communicate with them, trying to answer those questions along the way. I don't know exactly what the intended course is, but I would hope that by November we would be in very good shape to have agreements ready to sign.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other board members with questions for our consultants in absentia? Any members of the public with comments or questions on the transition plan update? All right, we'll close public comment. Any closing comments from board members on this item? I think we hear some desire and hope that we can get these things done. So we'll keep focused on that. We will move now then to 8C, the Habitat Conservation Plan. And it's the Josh Metz show again from one of his other locations. It's a disclosed location, however.
Yes, Chair, Josh will provide a brief update on with a PowerPoint presentation. We have both Aaron Harwain and Aaron Gabby, who have been working on this project for several years. Both of them have successfully completed quite a bit of the technical work that was required and background work. We now have a document that's becoming a published document for the review of all of us in the region and elsewhere. And as a consequence of their work, we now have something in front of us. We do owe them a little bit of current, for some of their current work, and we have some future work as well. And so Josh will take you through the status.
Yeah, so we're catching many balls in our dwindling staff, but luckily we have this team of seasoned consultants who've been working, some of them for just about almost as long as it's been happening on the HCP. And it's combined EIR, EIS, which is the second set of documents needed to implement the program. But just in the last few days, this week, we have been working with very quick turnaround in close communication with our friends at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, who are the sort of final approvers of the public draft document. So we've been addressing some final concerns their council raised. After a lengthy 3 or 4 week review, we got a response and they needed comments back in a matter of days. So Erin Harwain and her team were burning the midnight oil this week to get those done. And it looks like from the latest communications we've had that we're on track to have them to their Washington office for processing towards notice in the Federal Register in early to mid-October. That would be the release of the public review draft HCP. So that would then start a 45-day review period where agencies and the public would review this draft and provide comments and feedback, and our team here would then be the ones to receive those comments and address them in a subsequent set of documents, leading to a final draft of each one of those, which would happen in the early part of 2020, and with a final approval sequences leading to, again, approval right as FORA winks out. So timelines are tight, but the real potential value of the HCP to what we're all trying to do, not only presently, but for the next, let's say, 50 years, is significant. Being able to have these permits with a local authorizing entity rather than having the projects individually try to mitigate the impacts of their development through lengthy and expensive processes directly with the federal and state agencies would be immense. It would help economic development. So with my other hat as the economic development guy, I'm pretty clear that that has emerged multiple times as both a concern on the one hand, but also a hope on the other by developers and companies looking to locate and grow here. So it has tremendous value, and along with all the other things that we have on our plate, it's kind of a unique time and opportunity for us. So I've been encouraged by the quality of the staff or the consulting team. They've really jumped in when we lost Mary, and that was probably 2-3 weeks ago now. And they have really stood up and took on a lot of communications, making sure we're in really detailed communication with the regulators and so on. So that's hopeful. And that leads to this one, which is our need to amend their contracts. Remember, we brought a series of consultant amendments to you earlier this year, excluding our environmental consultants because we were working with them to get this public review draft completed. We were expecting to bring this item perhaps at a later meeting, but given our staff transitions, it's become necessary to bring it now. And so we have included in the board report a scope of work for each of the firms and request for an NTE increase to their existing contracts to allow that work to continue to get us through the public review period and response to comments. And then there is potential once we see what those comments are and what the scope of that work is, that we would need to come back for another amendment. But we would kind of do that in a as-needed basis. And I've made it very...
Josh, isn't that predicated on the kind of public responses come in and what will be required to respond to those?
Exactly, yeah. And so there's a series of public meetings and other things that happen to recruit and gain those comments, and having been through some processes like that before in the past, I can see where it could lead to a fair amount of work, But I have made it clear, and I think both of the consultant teams have also agreed that, we're aware of the unique opportunity, the timeliness and importance of the work, and on a professional basis would work to make it as efficient as possible. So the recommendation from the staff is to approve these contract amendments.
Thank you. Are there any questions by board members on this item?
If I may?
Director O'Connell?
Yes, I noticed in your fiscal impact, you make reference to the funds being available for ICF, but I didn't see anything in the fiscal impact as far as the money being available for Denise Duffy. And I'm wondering, is it part of the budget for 1920? Or if not, where's it coming from? I'm looking at page 35.
Funds for both of these would be available. So that was an oversight. Should see ICF and DDA.
In the budget for 1920?
Yeah, we included money for, we expected additional consulting needs, and so there is money there. We've also had some cost savings from staff transitions that could help support this work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Apologies for that.
Any other board member questions? Is there any member of the public with comments or questions on this item? All right, I'll bring it back to the board then. I would entertain, if there are no further comments or discussion, I would entertain a motion to support staff's recommendation for the ICF and DD&A contracts amendments.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Phillips and various seconds, but we'll take a second by Director Carbone. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. Passes unanimously. That brings us to the end of our business items, so now we can move to public comment. This is a time, if there are members of the public who wish to comment on items that were not on today's agenda, this is your opportunity to wax eloquent for 3 minutes.
Ron Cheshire. It appears that FORA is disappearing as mysteriously as it came into my life. You know, there was a Defense Authorization Act of 1993 that was created by the federal government to basically facilitate economic development conveyances. It was a process. And it was to develop local reuse authorities. Okay? Sort of like this one. And it was basically a preferred system, but not required by the federal government. You know, for years we were sold that FORA was established because the federal government just wanted one entity to deal with. And I don't think that's really true. But I would be interested in knowing what the U.S. Army Colonel and BRAC Bill have to say about the possibilities of having to deal with either LAFCO or multiple agencies, and what their position may be, because it always was my understanding that BRAC did have to sign off on FORA being the local reuse authority, and that would be the entity they worked with. It's disappointing to basically hear what's taken place in Sacramento. I've been up there a lot over the last 30 years, and I sort of know how things work, and I guarantee you no committee killed that bill. That was done by the chair. And she wouldn't know where to buy a decent hamburger or a cup of coffee in this town. It was a district bill that a state senator would basically submit and shouldn't really have any problems with. Something happened. And one of these days it's going to come out. There are a ton of lobbyists in Sacramento, and I think we only called about 50 of them, along with a bunch of other people. And when it comes out, yeah, I'll be in the weekly and every other paper in the area and stuff, but those that engaged in whatever took place, I said it before, watch out what you wish for. You may get it.
Thank you, Mr. Cheshire.
Yeah,
time is up.
the time is up?
It is.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed there weren't everybody named in the letter from the senator.
Thank you. Any
Did
other
everybody
members,
else notice?
Any other members of the public with comments on items not on today's agenda? All right, we'll close public comment. We'll move now to items from members. Any announcements? Yes, Director Oglesby and then Director Hale.
I just want to be quick. I don't want to say it's too bad I have to follow Mr. Cheshire, but I did want to speak about, SB 189. I wanted to thank Senator Monty for his hard work on that bill, and I want to thank the other jurisdictions that supported it. The City of Seaside was on the losing end of that, but what I'm saying is I think you guys did it in the best interest of what you thought was right. So I want to tell you myself, I appreciate what you guys did, and I want to be on the record thanking Senator Monty for the hard work that he's been doing for FORA throughout his tenure.
Thank you. Director Hale?
Some of you may have heard that we are moving forward on Highway 68 improvements, which is a project that was in the FORA CIP for a long time. And we're having an environmental impact report scoping meeting on October 3rd at Monterey Salinas Transit at 5 p.m. So as far as I can tell, we don't have a special meeting before then. So I wanted to make sure everybody knew about it since Caltrans is doing the outreach. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other board members with announcements? All right. That then brings us to adjournment. So may it be so. Have a good weekend.